Good evening. I want to thank you all for dropping in on a Wednesday evening to our PPS Advocacy Training Night. I really appreciate you being here. If you are looking for interpretation, there's an interpretation button at the bottom right-hand side of your screen, and you can click that and select your preferred language. There's also some text in the chat box for you to follow. But we are kicking off, and so I just welcome you to this space. And I'd like to just take a minute or so to go over the agenda. So, on tonight's agenda, we are here to provide information on education funding in Oregon and the PPS 25-26 budget. We also want to share the legislative priorities, provide an overview of the legislature and legislative process, and then highlight advocacy strategies, resources, and opportunities. And so that is our plan tonight. Before we begin, I want to start off with just some guiding documents that we use in Portland Public Schools. There were three overall documents. Next slide, please, that I just want to speak on briefly. The first is PPS Reimagined, and that's our document that really speaks to how we are preparing our students and our educators to make their way in our system through graduation. So it really talks about our priorities and the shifts that are needed to make that happen. Our Forward Together plan is our strategic plan for racial equity, inclusion, and excellence. And it's really built on four key pillars that you can see listed below. And then the third one is the Board of Education goals, and that talks about eliminating any opportunity and outcome gaps and making sure that all of our students are reading by third grade, meeting standard for fifth grade math. In eighth grade, they're graduating, leaving eighth grade, ready for high school, and then, of course, that high school completion. All of these documents speak to our why, which is our mission, right? And it's about educating our students and making sure that they reach their highest potential and that they're productive and respectful and self-reliant and responsible citizens who value the richness of diversity, not only here in our city in Portland, but beyond. So again, I want to thank you for being here, and I'm going to pass it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Michelle Morrison.
Before Michelle talks, this is Deborah Kafori, Chief of Staff. I just wanted to jump in real quick and tell people that at the bottom of your screen, you should see a sign that says Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout tonight's event, if you could just put your question in the Q&A, and we will try to answer it. We will also have time at the end of the agenda for live questions and answers, but please note, if we cannot get to everyone's question tonight, we will be collating them and putting them up on our website under an FAQ. So your question will get answered. Appreciate you all coming tonight. And also, I don't see the slide deck up. Is it up?
Yeah, it's up. And I also wanted
Okay.
to say that we have members on the screen who will introduce themselves as they speak just to kind of save some time. And then I also want to acknowledge that we have a panelist with a hand up, and I'm just wondering if that's for language interpretation.
Thank you, Superintendent Armstrong. Stephanie or Ms. Nguyen, do you have a question?
Okay, maybe it's solved. Okay, so with that, I want to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Michelle Morrison.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. Michelle Morrison, Chief Financial Officer for Portland Public Schools. Very excited to serve the Portland community and so thankful for all of your care and interest and passion for our students and the advocacy that you're about to embark on. So if we could advance the slide. Thank you. So we have kind of a history of school funding in Oregon, really talks about what has happened over time in terms of funding for all schools in Oregon, changes to tax law and structures that have impacted the way that we fund education. So you can see over time, we have made some movement since the initial tax changes in the late 90s. Most recently, Measure 98, which is funding for high school success, and the student investment account that is provided for by the Student Success Act. Please advance. Okay, for current service level, that is a term that is used to describe what it would cost. It's to identify the amount of resources required to provide the same services to students today in the upcoming year. Historically, current service level has been a recurring topic in the legislative session as we move towards appropriation setting for the biennium for schools. It's different for every school district, but there's a target for the state that we definitely strive to make. On the right, you can see described the quality education model, and this was established by the Quality Education Commission, who reviews every 2 years how Oregon is funding schools in an effort to this ideal state of services for students at every level. And we continue to be underfunded according to the commission's report. So a part of our advocacy is always anchoring back to a model that we know would meet the needs of our students and is substantially underfunded. Dr. Armstrong, would you like to add anything on this slide?
No, thank you so much. That was perfect.
Great. All right, if we could advance. So financial pressures contributing to our shortfall. This information has been widely shared with the community, and again here tonight. We have identified rising costs for every part of our operation, from staffing costs to the same things you may be experiencing in home, including utilities, transportation, services. All of those costs are increasing faster than our current rate of funding. And we have limited revenue. So this appropriation set by the state determines funding for all schools in Oregon based on a high appropriation amount that is distributed through a formula that's developed in order to equalize per student allocations across the state. And there's not a lot we can do to increase that once it's determined. The third factor here is our declining enrollment. Unfortunately, Portland Public Schools is experiencing a faster rate of enrollment decline than the average in Oregon. And because we're funded on a per student basis, that means fewer resources for us to offer services. So this is a multi-year process. We started early understanding our position and advocating for additional funds. And we anticipate there will be some challenges as we move forward into the 25-26 and 26-27 school years. As far as advocacy goes, I think I'm going to hand this off to Chief Kafori to discuss our advocacy approach. Thank you again for your time tonight.
Actually, I'm honored to be able to introduce our Government Relations Manager, Lisa Merrick. She's going to be talking about our advocacy work tonight.
Thank you all, and I will be discussing that shortly. We're going to start with Director DePass, who's going to share the Portland Public Schools legislative priorities for the current legislative session.
So thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm sure you have better things to do on a Wednesday than take this webinar, but I'm really glad you're here. So our legislative agenda has to do with advocating for stable and equitable investments, starting with passing the governor's recommended changes to the current service level budget while making it clear that that's a floor and not a ceiling. Those investments will help us fully fund special education services, provide funding for student supports, maintain sustainable funding for school nutrition programs, extended learning opportunities, and early literacy, and invest overall in high quality education for our students. Additional investments could include facilities improvements, modernize the school curriculums, electrifying the school bus and other sustainability concerns that improve student safety, green schoolyards, ensuring safety and security from cyber threats, and improve students' access to healthcare. Overall, with all of these things that we're advocating for are the goal of improving student outcomes in Portland. And we need those investments from the legislature in order to produce those outcomes that we all envision for our students. I believe I'm passing it to Director Chair Wong.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize for the background. I'm in my car because I'm out and about taking my kid to her activities tonight. So thank you again for being here. Yeah, I just want to highlight really quick. We have some short-term goals and some long-term goals. And short-term goals. I think people are going to talk about later. But currently there's there's a bill going around just trying to lift the cap to special education. And one of the things about Portland, as you all know, it's just more expensive here. So things just cost more to do stuff. And, being able to lift this cap is an equity issue because, we currently the cap is at 11%. And by the way, that was set back in 1991 when things were way different and probably a lot cheaper. But, now we have, 17% of our students are classified as special ed, which means 6% are not being funded by the state. Things like that. And then there's also like an early literacy bill that's being worked on as well. And as we know from the data, shows very clearly that where students mostly fall behind is before kindergarten and over summer. So whenever we can push for more funding and more programs for like early literacy and summer programs, that's also part of our legislative agenda. It helps close that gap, and that's one of our board priorities. And as long as we get people out there and talking to our legislators often, because one of the challenges last year was there was some momentum to kind of start changing things, but then we kept hearing feedback from a lot of I did a lot of legislators saying like, yeah, they care about this stuff, but we're not hearing it. A lot of talk from our families and our their constituents. So and then we also have some long-term goals. As many of you know, Oregon funding is, we don't have a sales tax here, we have income and property tax, but because now education is funded primarily through income tax likes to go up and down with the economy. And any teacher who has been teaching in Oregon for more than 10 years has gone through a couple cycles of the economy crashing, and it really puts a hamper on progress in education in Oregon. It's one of those things where every time you crash, we have every school district has to fire so many people. We lose all this institutional knowledge. Projects that people have been working on for years go away, and when we finally get back to normal funding, we're rebuilding instead of progressing, and it is a huge barrier for Oregon to kind of keep up with, especially with other states. So that's part of our long-term goals in terms of like trying to get the legislator to think big and change the way we fund education. But that I think that's a discussion for later. But yeah, I would like to hand this off to our superintendent, which would I'm sure has much more to add. Thank you.
We can go ahead and go to the next slide. I believe I am up next. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know it's there's a lot of other places you could be, and we appreciate you taking the time to learn more about the Oregon's legislative process and advocacy. My name is Lisa Merrick. I am the Government Relations Manager for Portland Public Schools. I'm going to share a little bit about the legislature and the legislative process, and then share some information on our advocacy toolkit. A lot of people may not be aware of the Oregon legislature, but every 2 years, the legislature gets together to pass a huge budget. It's a really important budget, and it impacts many parts of our lives, not just education. The way Oregon has it structured is that there's a bicameral legislature, meaning that we have a House of Representatives and we have a Senate. For every member of the Senate, there's 2 representatives that align with their district. And Oregonians can choose their legislators by voting in every election, every even-numbered year. And then these single-member districts elect the legislators. So every one of us here would have 1 representative and 1 senator representing us in the Oregon State Legislature. And the lines for these representatives' districts are redrawn after the census. So most recently, we went through a redistricting process, and the district lines were redrawn in 2021. I will link it in the chat shortly, but we do have a tool on our website where you can look up your legislator. So you can see who represents you in the Oregon State Legislature. And we also have information in our toolkit about which legislators represent which schools in PPS. The legislature has a lot of responsibilities, as I mentioned earlier. A huge one of them is the state's biennial budget. And so they set the budget for education, for human services, for healthcare, a lot of huge agency budgets and priorities that come up. This session, our Oregon legislature is tackling a lot of issues that likely impact your own lives. That includes the state and condition of our roads and public transportation, housing and homelessness, education, of course, and many other priorities. The legislative body also handles other administrative roles and oversight of state agencies, and the Senate does appointments for the governor. So there's a lot of other processes that they undertake, but the biennial budget is a huge one. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. On the House side, you are going to see these key speakers, and they represent Oregon in leadership roles. First of all, we have the Speaker of the House, Representative Fahey. She has a really significant role in appointing different members of the House to various committees. She determines which bills go to which committees, and she has a lot of oversight over the full House body. Representative Ben Bowman is the House Majority Leader, so he's the caucus leader of the House Democrats in Oregon. On the other side, we have Rep. Christine Drazen, who is the Minority Leader, and she's the caucus leader for the House Republicans. And then a couple of other important leaders include Representative Sanchez. She is a member of the Portland Public Delegation. She's the co-chair of the Joint Ways and Means Committee, which is a really powerful committee and a really powerful role that determines what budgets get passed. We also have Representative Ruiz. He represents Gresham, and he is a committee chair on the education subcommittee of that powerful Ways and Means Committee. So he is a leader that is going to help oversee which education budgets get passed. We also have Representative Neron, who is the chair of the House Education Committee. She is a leader from the Wilsonville area and is a former teacher herself. We can go to the next slide. On the Senate side, we have Senator Rob Wagner. He's the president of the Senate. He has a pretty similar significant role, similar to the Speaker of the House, where he also appoints people to different committees and determines which bills get heard in different committees. He represents part of Portland Public Schools. He has Southwest Portland in his district. We also have Senator Bonham. He's the minority leader of the Republican caucus in the state Senate, and he is from the Dalles area. Senator Jama is the majority leader of the Senate Democrat caucus. He's not a PPS representative. He got redistricted out when they went through the last district line process. He represents Multnomah, the eastern part of Multnomah County. We also have Senator Lieber. She is the counterpart to Representative Sanchez as the co-chair of the Ways and Means Committee. Senator Solman is the co-chair to Rep. Ruiz of the Education Subcommittee on the Ways and Means Committee. And then Senator Frederick is another Portland Public Schools representative from North Portland. He is the chair of the Senate committee. These are really important leaders to keep in mind as you're engaging in the legislative processes. Folks to keep in mind who make really key decisions in the legislative process. And we go to the next slide. The Oregon Legislative Information System, that is a website. It's called OLIS. I've linked that website here. There's a few things you can find on that website. Namely, it's where the bills can be found online, and we'll be linking to bills in future correspondence. It's also a spot where you can track different committees. You can see who's in different committees. And you can even live stream if you really want to get nerdy and watch committees. This would be where you would go. I took a photo of a bill. It's the bill that Chair Wong was referring to earlier. This is HB 2953 as an example. It's a bill that would lift the cap on special education funding. It actually had a public hearing earlier this week and a work session. And there's some information on OLIS, as you can see, where you can look and see who is sponsoring the bill. You can see a link where you can read the text of the bill if you want. You can read amendments that are also posted online. The most important thing I want to put your attention on is the testimony. There's some links at the top, or some tabs, where you can click on registering to testify. So there's an option where you can testify on a bill either remotely or in person if you have the ability to get down to Salem, or you can submit written testimony. So whenever there's really key bills, we will put out action alerts, but and we'll include links to the various ways you can testify. But this is a great way to weigh in if there's a bill that you're really passionate about, especially if it comes to improving education. This is the website you would go to do so. And we can go to the next slide. The Oregon legislative session is well underway. The session actually began in January, at the end of January, January 21st, 2025. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the legislature meets during odd numbered years to pass a biennial budget. And it's about a 6-month long session. And then during even numbered years, they meet for about a month for a short session. The session is constitutionally required to end on June 28th. They may end a little bit before if they're able to get through their work in time, but there's a couple of key dates between now and then that I want to draw your attention to. There's some quarterly revenue forecasts, and essentially we have a state economist who provides projections around how much funding the state is collecting in different resources like income taxes and lottery resources. They provide kind of an overview of the state's budget, and our legislators use that information to inform their budget decision-making process. And so we'll have one February revenue forecast on February 26th. That will inform kind of the next step in the budgeting process. And the Ways and Means co-chairs will release their budget framework in March. And I'll back up because I left off the governor's recommended budget, which was released in December. This is kind of the starting point of a conversation around state budgets where the governor releases her recommendations around how the state should fund different agencies and the education system. And that is the starting point of the conversation. And legislators will weigh in and provide other numbers as they have these revenue forecasts throughout the session. The May revenue forecast is really significant because that's the last projection that the state will get from the state economists before the final budget decisions will be made. And we can go to the next slide. Linked in this slide is our advocacy toolkit, which I will also post in the chat. There's a lot of resources online, which I encourage you to look at. We have all of the names of the representatives and senators who represent Portland Public Schools, and we also have information on which schools are in their district. So if you want to find out who represents your student or your own school, that's a great place to look. You can find their email and contact information. And this is where we really encourage the community to get involved. The board and the superintendent have been very involved so far in the legislative process, but it's so important that families and students and teachers and administrators and all the folks who are touched by the education system speak up to their representatives and share their stories. We don't have that many current senators and representatives who actually have kids in the education system at this moment. So some of our representatives are disconnected from that day-to-day life in our classrooms and in our schools. And it's really important that we invite them in and we share our stories. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. So I encourage you to look at this toolkit. We have sample emails that you can send to legislators to share your story, ways to schedule meetings and tips on how to have a successful meeting with your legislator, and emails you can send, different ways to track bills, as I mentioned earlier, through OLIS. And then there's also other ways to engage externally as well. You can also write a letter to your editor of your local newspaper, or write an op-ed, or share your story on social media. Those are also powerful tools to amplify your story and how you're impacted by decisions around the education budget. And those are good ways to reach our leaders as well. So please read that, and we'll go into more details in some of these upcoming slides, but we'll definitely be also sending out alerts around bills that will hopefully strengthen our education funding before the end of session. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Pitts.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Pitts, the mom of 4 kiddos in Portland and chair of the fund for PPS board this year. I joined the Fund for PPS board because I really believe that connecting community dollars to our schools is going to be transformative for our children and their futures. I have a couple of updates. The first one is pretty operational. Lisa mentioned a little bit about this. We know that legislative session moves very quickly, and families and caregivers, community members, probably have a hard time keeping up with how swiftly things are happening. So the fund and PPS has created an advocacy website where you can find resources for your own advocacy and coalition building efforts, events that are happening in our community in Portland and in Salem, as well as really important legislative dates and benchmarks that we should be looking forward to. When we drop the link in the chat, I would just say, make sure you bookmark it and go back to it as frequently as you can. And also send us your events. What kinds of things are you hosting yourself so that we can share them out widely and support you in your work to advocate at the state level? You'll see here on the screen that we have a few opportunities coming up in Portland. Specifically, we know that it's important to follow us on Facebook and Instagram so that you can maintain some of these dates on your own calendars. If we could go to the next slide. The next update is a little more strategic, and I want to just say, this PPS toolkit, the advocacy toolkit that Lisa's pulled together, is really going to be your guide for how to support and lead advocacy efforts right now. Some really important things to remember about any kind of coalition or advocacy work that you're doing. Relationships are going to be at the center of everything you're doing. Your network, your connectedness to some of those key legislators is critical. And like Lisa said, they've already spelled that out in that toolkit doc. So go ahead and find your legislators there. A lot of the advocacy work might seem complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. You probably have all the tools in your tool belt to do this already. Your personal story is going to be your golden ticket. Remember to connect that back to the issues that you're fighting for. And always back up your story with the objective data. We know there's a lot of data flying around out there right now, but connecting your story to that is going to be key. And joining others in this work, I'm looking at, over 180 participants tonight. This is so exciting to have this many people in one space who care about advocating for our schools. Join one another, build your coalition. It's going to be much more powerful than you doing that work alone. You might be wondering what that looks like. How do you even take the next step? The advocacy toolkit from PPS is a really great guide. And I'm also going to drop into the chat another toolkit from the National Advocacy Labs group that has a pretty clear step-by-step guide on how to build. This is Okay. I believe that we have a troll in the meeting.
That's
I'll
so
keep going.
exciting. I've never been on a call with one of those before. I'm really excited about that. It must mean that we're famous and we're doing such a good job tonight.
And they chose to play a Low Taper Fade song, which I feel like I need to tell my middle school son tonight. Oh, geez. Okay, so that leads me to my next thing, which I wanted to leave you all with. Please let us know your events. Email the info@fundforpps.org email, but also just like the importance of this moment is so critical. Oregon is in a really unique space right now where our governor, our Department of Education, and our legislature have committed to taking up a conversation about reforming funding structures. This happens very infrequently at the state level, and now is the opportunity for us to lean in. So we together, everyone in our community, we are the ones who can drive the narrative that they're going to be taking up in Salem. And we together can set the highest bar possible for how our state supports our work in schools. So please just thank you all for being here, and don't hesitate to reach out to the fund. We're here in partnership with PPS to drive this work forward. And I'll pass it off to the next speaker. Thanks so much.
We will go ahead and turn it over to Ashley Schofield with CPPS next.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone, for the invite tonight. It's really great to be here. Just gonna pull over my notes over here a little bit. So my name is Ashley Schofield. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a parent to a third grader at Preda Mile Elementary over here in Southwest Portland. Tonight I'm wearing my hat as the current board president for Community and Parents for Public Schools. The mission of Community and Parents for Public Schools is to build a sustainable network of diverse parent, family, and community voices that works to ensure a high-quality education for all children in Portland Public Schools. CPPS, also known as CPPS, has been around since about the 1990s, working on really important issues addressing Portland Public Schools, so that they have so there's a parent voice. And this is a Portland chapter of a national organization of Parents for Public Schools. This latest iteration of the organization has come from really the momentum around the November 2023 teacher strikes, and where parents really coalesced together around supporting our schools, supporting our teachers, supporting quality education. And I think we have taken that momentum to really kind of work on the desire for parents and caregivers in the district to figure out how we can work to get quality education and resources to our students in our classrooms. CPPS is currently focused on empowering parents, caregivers, and community members to get in front of their lawmakers. It's kind of one of our bigger pushes at the moment, and to ask our lawmakers why they're not fully funding public schools in Oregon. But other things that we're doing as an organization that I wanted to just throw out there was that in addition to this legislative work and advocacy work, our goal really is to promote public schools as the choice for families. So some things we've done in the past and we'll continue to try to do are mini grants for school communities who want to put on their kinder welcome events, if they want to put on maybe make it more accessible or do some more events in the summer. So that's something we'll plan to do this spring again. And another area that we're trying to work on and get more support around is just being in front and being a liaison between parents and caregivers and what's going on with the school board and the district decisions. But in terms of our goals for legislative advocacy work, our biggest push, right, is just to empower parents and caregivers and community members to share their stories about how underfunded public schools are affecting their students' classrooms and to empower them to be advocates for their school community. There's been some really amazing, awesome opportunities and events around the district the last couple months, put on by parents who, are just normal parents with full-time jobs and taking care of full-time families and doing all this work on our extra free time. And so I just wanted to give a shout out because a lot of this work has just been around getting the momentum around parents who are already activated in their own school communities. So it's been great. And so I wanted to do a shout out. There's one tomorrow. There's a K through 12 public education funding forum at Roosevelt High School. It's tomorrow at 7 p.m. I'll put the RSVP link in the chat. But there's plans. The panel includes Senator Lou Frederick, Senator Lisa Reynolds, Representative Shannon Isdor, and Representative Travis Nelson. So if you're in that committee, and everybody's invited, we really, I think these are kind of events we want to show up, even if those aren't your representatives or your senators, so that they can see how important public schools are in our community. And then CPPS will also be planning some trips down to Salem. Either we're going to try to do a big one together and get transportation support and head down to Salem together, hopefully in mid-April. But also encouraging school communities to just, find a couple people and go down together. And so CPPS can kind of support. We have some materials around how to do that. And then, we are working really closely with the Oregon PTA. A lot of the board members are on their own local unit PTA boards. A lot of the board members are on the Oregon PTA Legislative Committee. So we really are working together because we're all wanting the same thing. We work really closely with the district and also the teacher union. It's real value of community and parents for public schools to work together with all the major stakeholders because we believe we really all want the same thing. So just wrap it up, we're doing some really great things. It's all because of parents like you, community members like you who want to get active, really want to support this cause that we know that we are not fully funding our quality education model. So however you're getting in front of your lawmaker, I think the main message is to let them know that it's not okay that they continue to underfund quality education. You can use your voice. You can share how that is affecting your school community. And if you need any resources, love for you to join CPPS distro lists. We work actively to kind of, collect all the opportunities going on in the district and also working at the state level. I think something that hasn't been said tonight is that we can really go down there as a force, but we can't also just do it as Portland. And so activating our neighbors across the region, across the state, if you know anybody, let's get them involved because we could all go down to Salem together. All right. That's it. Thank you so much.
If
go ahead. We're going to turn it over to Robin Romer with the Oregon PTA.
Yeah, welcome and thank you from me as well for everybody attending tonight. And thank you to PPS for putting this on and inviting us. I'm a volunteer with the Oregon PTA, serve on the board, as is David Jones, who joins me in this presentation. A little bit, we're both parents in PPS, both dads with kids collectively at Vestal, Maplewood, and Jackson Middle School in PPS. And we wanted to share a little bit about what we as Oregon PTA have been up to and maybe share some tools that can help you in your local advocacy work. But on the next slide, we first wanted to start sharing the goals that we have as Oregon PTA. And I think it's important to note that those aren't goals that I set. Those goals are set by our members. If you are a member of a local PTA, you can participate in the process of setting the goals of Oregon PTA. And those goals were set last year by our members at our annual convention. And our biggest goal, as we're all here united today, is to increase funding per student for our kids in our schools. And we mean that inflation adjusted, not just more than last year, but actual real value dollars more in our schools. And we know that the 11.3 from the governor is not going to be enough to serve our schools. We also want to make sure that the basic needs of our kids are met, that they can come to school ready to learn, that they are not hungry, that if they have that they have glasses, if they need them, that their medical and mental health are taken care of. We are advocating for schools to be safe, welcoming, and supportive learning environments that are inclusive for all students, from special ed. Obviously, our undocumented students is something we're very worried about at the moment, and we try our best to support them. And lastly, we do events like tonight, where we are hoping to empower, to educate parents, and to further build community for families. And I'm passing on to David.
Thanks, Robin. If we go to the next slide, I can talk about some of the tools that we have at Oregon PTA to help educate and empower families and advocates in our community. This first slide is a very complicated looking chart that actually shows the method of funding from the state government. And I think if we look at the next slide too, it might show a more complicated version of that chart. Oh, we can go back one slide, sorry. Yeah, we'll stay there. I think Rob's going to post a link in the chat to that slide as well. This just kind of shows where the money's coming from. It kind of explains the different funding streams that we have. It makes it a little bit more clear how we get more money and how we can ask for more money. There's also, I think Robin will link to a video that kind of walks people through this because it's a little complicated. But the video really makes it easier to follow. If we can move on to the next slide now. One other thing we did last year in 2024, we hosted a series of online forums called From the Capitol to Our Classroom, where we hosted various people who've been involved with the decision-making and current decision-making about how funds get used in schools, all the way from the State House down into the classroom. All these are online as well, and they are a great opportunity to learn about the process and also learn about the history of education advocacy over the last 30 years. And the next slide, please. This last tool that we have is a bill tracker, which tracks the current bills in the current session related to education causes and education funding. You can also break it down and see where these bills are right now in committee, what's being worked on, the progress that's being made. And it is a great tool to see what is happening in real time down in Salem. All these tools are actually used statewide by Oregon PTA, but obviously they have a specific use here in Portland. As Oregon PTA, we serve the whole state. I'm actually region director for Region 2, which is Portland Public Schools. So if you are on a PTA or have questions about PTA or our advocacy or anything else, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And again, thank you for having us tonight. I'll turn it back over to Robin.
Yeah, and I wanted to share a couple more on the next few slides, a couple more ways for you to stay in touch and build connections, build community. The first one is sign up for our newsletter on our website, OregonPTA.org. It's under the Advocacy Take Action menu. That is where we send out newsletters, where we send out legislative alerts, where you can simply email your legislator on specific bills from time to time. That is something we do. Then on the next slide, we host 2 regular events. The first one is a fairly loose hangout for advocates. We call it the PTA Advocacy Connection every other Wednesday at 12:30, lunch hour, seeing some friendly faces, chatting about what's going on in the advocacy world. We just had one today, so the next one is in 2 weeks. There's a link in the chat to register. And then on the next slide, more formally, oh, no, that slide got deleted, sorry. We also have a legislative committee as PTA. That is kind of the formal body within Oregon PTA that prepares our advocacy, where we plan the events that we're doing and our strategy. So if that is something that interests you, please sign up, and you're very welcome to join us. And that is our little pitch. And I'm turning it back over to PPS, our gracious hosts.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm Deborah Kafori. I'm the Chief of Staff to Dr. Armstrong, and I'm just really grateful that all of you came on tonight. It was really interesting to hear from so many different voices tonight. Thank you all who participated. We're going to go through a few of the questions and answers. I hope you all remember at the bottom of your screen, there's a question mark and it says Q&A, and that's where you can type your questions into the chat. A lot of the questions have been answered already. You will see by clicking at the top bar, those which are still open, those which have been answered. These questions will be collated, and we will put these on an FAQ on our website as well. So if your question isn't answered here tonight, possibly because we want to have one of our experts back at the district office answer your question, you will see it on our FAQ, which will be on our website in just a few days. We do have some time right now, though, to answer some of these questions. So I'm going to start with some questions for our panelists tonight. One of them, Lisa Merrick, would you please answer a question? How is advocacy different from lobbying?
That is a great question. Well, they are very similar, and there's definitely a lot of overlap, but lobbying there's a particular process to sign up to lobby for the state. Advocacy is more of getting our families and students and folks on the ground to share stories with legislators. We do have district level lobbying strategies, and those come at the direction of the board and the superintendent and PPS leadership, whereas advocacy is more pulling together multiple perspectives of the entire community to encourage our legislators to take action on education funding. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think that's a great answer. All right, so there are several questions in here, Lisa, that have to do with what's the timing of contacting our legislators, and people are asking, how will they know when important bills are posted? How will they keep involved in this legislative session that we know starts off somewhat on the slow side, but then picks up steam and goes very quickly at the end? Can you answer those questions?
Absolutely. We will pull together action alerts on various topics. It will normally be bills that we encourage people to testify on, and whether that's signing up to testify in Salem or virtually or writing a letter. We'll provide the background on the bill and how it would impact PPS, just so you have some additional information. There's also times we try to activate the community around other topics. Maybe it'll be encouraging folks to email their legislators after the revenue forecast comes out and it's really positive. And we want to encourage our legislative delegation to make sure that those additional resources that the state has goes to education. We've also created action alerts when there have been bad bills that would, I think there was one last year, it was actually a good bill until it wasn't, the Early Literacy Initiative. We fully supported that as an additive investment, and there was an amendment that was going to make that a carve out of existing education funding that we already have that's already going to other priorities. So we put out an action alert to encourage the PPS community to email their legislators to tell them to invest additional resources and not reuse existing educational resources for a priority. So there's a lot of ways you can engage, and we'll be closely tracking all of the legislative activity and definitely putting out alerts when it's helpful for the community to engage. But there's also opportunities for you to reach out to the legislators that represent your school outside of that. It's really helpful to create relationships and then build and nurture them throughout the session. So you could email your legislator, you could schedule a meeting with them, you could go to their town halls and make sure that you're elevating the importance of education funding in that space as well. So there's definitely a lot of other ways to stay engaged outside of our kind of action alerts.
Thank you, Lisa. There's a question on here that says, is there a cost cuts and proposed savings from PPS documents, and where is it available from? There was a question like this earlier as well on, we're in the very beginning stages of our budget. I want to give a huge shout out to Dr. Armstrong for holding these forums so early on in our budget session. We know that the legislative session is on right now, and that's why we're out talking about budget and getting people activated. The actual budget itself from Portland Public Schools will come out on April the 22nd, and that kicks off the budget process where the board of school board gets involved. There will be lots of opportunities for public input at that point, but we want people to start advocating and lobbying their legislators right now. Right now is the time to start letting people know, sharing your personal stories, sharing your input, as Lisa has and others have talked about tonight, is going to be very helpful. We had another question. Are there going to be additional opportunities to have public forums around the PPS budget? Definitely, yes. This, as I said, this is just the beginning. The best way to stay up to date on the PPS budget is to go to our PPS website and click on the document that says budget right there. It'll be front and center. Let's see, we've got another question here that I'm hoping that Michelle Morrison, our CFO, can answer. Or I see Ashley's typing a question and answer it as well. But Rebecca says, I'm still a bit confused about the reasons unique to Oregon leading to underfunding and our education systems relative to other states. Michelle, can you answer that question? Can you talk about the differences between Oregon funding and other states?
Yeah, thank you, Chief Gafori. The amount of taxes they collect, whether it's property taxes or income taxes or sales tax. And so it's really driven by the lawmakers that determine the funding structure. Also the volatility of the funding structure, how protected it is from changes in the economy. And so I think states with different levels of resources and different numbers of students to serve have each generated their own funding. In the late 90s, there was a shift away from each district having to pass local levies on an annual, biennial basis in order to fund education, to create a statewide distribution formula in an effort to be more equitable in areas that couldn't pass the levy. I don't know if that answers the question specifically, but each state does have their own method for determining funding for students.
That's great, Michelle. Thank you so much. And I am really excited to introduce everyone to Michelle Morrison, who is our new CFO at PPS.
Thank you, Chief Kafori. I apologize for having my camera off. My signal is not very strong right now. So
No, that's, you know, it's just surprising that we're still using these Zoom worlds. We were so good at it back in the COVID days, and I think we're all getting a little rusty. Lisa, I got another question for you. What is the role of the Ways and Means Committee? Can they just change bills, and how does it all work?
Bills will, so if we go back to the very beginning of the process, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate will each refer bills to different committees. They will begin usually in policy committees. And then if there is any kind of fiscal impact to a bill, whether it's going to bring in revenue to the state or if it's going to have a fiscal impact on the state budget, it will go either to the Revenue Committee or to the Joint Ways and Means Committee. And some people make some jokes about how a lot of bills go to that committee to die. It's, you know, hundreds of bills will move through the legislative process. And then at the end, after that May revenue forecast has come out, the co-chairs of the budget committee will make a lot of those decisions around what bills will pass and get funded and what bills will not be moving forward.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one last question. I want to reiterate that there's a lot of great questions that we haven't had time to answer tonight, and we will get to each and every one of them if you are patient with us and go to the website in a few days. We'll have all these questions up and answered. And if you feel like you have additional questions that you weren't able to ask tonight, please reach out to any of us here on this call, and we're happy to answer your questions at any time. Really know that we are all in this together. And that leads me to the last question, which says, what is PPS staff doing to connect with other districts to advocate together? Great question. As you can see from the call tonight, we have a lot of partners across the state of Oregon, and we are all working together because we know that's the only way that we're going to make change in Salem. There are several statewide organizations, some of them on this call. We are also working very closely with COSA, which is the very important acronym. Maybe Lisa can jump in there and tell me what COSA stands for.
Coalition of Schools Administrators.
Perfect. That was just on the tip of my tongue. Coalition of School Administrators. COSA is advocating for changes to the legislative session across the state. I know our superintendent has weekly phone calls with superintendents from around the state. Lisa Merrick, our government relations manager, is in close contact with them. So we realize that it's not just going to be Portland out there banging our drums. We really have to work with, it can be, the district that our House Minority Leader, Christine Draisnan, lives in. They were hit very hard from PERS increases. So we're going to be working closely with them to make sure that we are all working together for the same goal of supporting our kids. With that, I want to turn it over to Dr. Armstrong for some parting words.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate our panelists for being here with us this evening. And I appreciate all of you out there in Zoom world listening and learning. When I think of the words that I'd love to leave you with tonight, is I think of a quote by Nelson Mandela: "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." State funding is essential to ensure that our schools can provide the programs, the support, and the infrastructure necessary for all of our students to thrive. And so your voice matters. When you advocate for fair and equitable funding, you are helping to ensure that our schools remain a place of opportunity, innovation, and success for every single one of our learners. And so you being here matters. The voice that you use in this process matters. Your time matters. So thank you for being here. Thank you to the team for being on this call. And I look forward to being in community advocating alongside you. Thank you and have a great evening.